Welcome back, Phelan-McDermid Syndrome Foundation, community, and podcast listeners. Before I start by introducing today's guest, I do want to preface that today's topic is a little heavier. Today, we will be talking about Autism BrainNet, funded by the Simons Foundation, which was created with the goal of facilitating and supporting autism research through the gift of brain donation. This is obviously a sensitive and often difficult topic. Our goal today is to provide education about the program to families and have a transparent conversation about how post-mortem brain tissue can move research forward in Phelan-McDermid syndrome. At PMSF, we believe families should have the opportunity to learn about all research studies available to them and make sure that they have the information needed to make an informed decision about themselves and their loved ones. So, let us welcome today Alycia Hallady, the Chief Science Officer at the Autism Science Foundation, and Lilliam Acosta, the Autism BrainNet's Outreach Manager. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for this opportunity to talk to PMS families about this really very important but under-discussed issue.
Yeah, thank you so much for having us.
Of course. And Alycia, you are a familiar face to our community. You used to be on our board.
I did.
But can you please introduce yourself and share your role at Autism BrainNet?
Sure. So I am Alycia Hallady. I'm the Chief Science Officer of the Autism Science Foundation. One of the things that we do is help communicate the importance of science to the community to make sure that they understand what the role of different scientific projects are. We are very, very pleased to be partnering with Autism BrainNet to help families, both rare disease families and then the general community, all know about the importance of this program, how they can get involved, and what it means.
Wonderful. And Lilliam, you are newer to our community, so I'd love to hear more just about your role at Autism BrainNet and then maybe how your career led you there.
Okay, sure. My name is Lilliam Acosta, and as you mentioned, Lauren, I'm the Outreach Manager for Autism BrainNet. I've been in this role for a little bit over 7 years. Have worked really closely with Alycia for all of my time and really just partnering with the Autism Science Foundation for community outreach program. Prior to joining Autism BrainNet, my whole career has been in nonprofits, particularly in public health, really educating communities around maternal and child health. So I had a very long career at the March of Dimes Foundation, where we provided education and health promotion to families. And so that really, led me to this role and really just continuing, with that same sort of mission of educating families and really spreading awareness about our program and what we hope to do and how families can get involved if this is something that they are interested in doing in the future.
Wonderful. And we will definitely be digging into that, but we are lucky to have you in this space now.
Thank you.
So I gave the briefest of introductions at the start about Autism BrainNet, but can you share with our families what Autism BrainNet actually is?
Sure. And I just also want to say, Lauren, that on behalf of our program, and I'm sure Alycia feels the same way, we are just very grateful to you and to the Phelan-McDermid community for really their continued support of our program in this research. As you mentioned, this is not sort of an easy thing to talk about. It's very sensitive. And so we try to make sure that, we want to encourage families to learn as much as possible about our program if that's something that they want to do. So Autism BrainNet, as you mentioned in the introduction, was established in 2014 and is funded by the Simons Foundation. And the goal is to build a bank of donated postmortem brain tissue to facilitate research into the biological causes of autism and related conditions like Phelan-McDermid. We are comprised of 4 biorepositories, or nodes as we call them. There are 3 of them in the United States. So that allows for donation from all over the country. And then we also have a partnership in Canada. And as a program and as a research program, and as we're doing right now, we work very closely with families, with researchers, with our partners, providers, to really provide a greater knowledge of this type of research and to ensure the most compassionate donation process for families during a very difficult time.
Can you give some examples, you or Alycia, about how these brain donations through Autism BrainNet have maybe led to some important findings?
So, the research has actually been going on for many, many years, and it has taken that many years to build up kind of like a body of evidence that shows what's going on in the brains of people with autism. So, that includes families with rare genetic disorders like Phelan-McDermid, and it also includes individuals who may not have a genetic diagnosis. So, what research is finding is there, seems to be, and through replication, one of the first things that was discovered was something called the synapse. So you have a cell body, and then you have a synapse that projects out to other neurons. On that synapse, there are little growths where neurons can connect to each other. And one of the first and highly replicated findings was that in people with autism, at least in certain areas of the brain, there are more of these little areas for synaptic connection. So people automatically go to a place like, oh, well, there's more. That must mean better things. And in fact, the brain is highly regulated. There is a very, very careful balance of the connections that are made between brain cells, the regions of the brain that are connected to each other. If you can imagine, if every single neuron was connected to every single other neuron in your brain, it would lead to actually things like, epilepsy and seizures. And so to have too many of these neurons connecting is not necessarily a good thing. And in fact, one kind of outcome of that is that a lot of new drugs to treat autism have been focused on reduction or at least pruning of some of these synaptic connections. So there's not so many of them. They haven't been FDA approved yet, but these are drugs that are kind of in consideration. So that is one thing that has been found. There also is this finding about something called interneurons in the brain. And these are neurons that I call them the yellow sign. So, like, if you have a neuron that's turned on and then another neuron that turns off, there's a neuron in the middle that kind of regulates the on and off. So, it's kind of like if you think of a stop sign, there's a green light, a red light, and then there's a yellow light. And the yellow light, those neurons are dysregulated as well. And so many people have suggested that that is one of the molecular bases for sensory processes, is that people with autism are not able to kind of regulate or have that signal that tells certain areas of the brain to slow down or other areas of the brain to speed up. That hasn't necessarily been completely proven because so many different people have so many different changes in sensory regulation, whether they're hypersensitive or hyposensitive. But it is an ongoing theory, which of course is being backed up with animal research. Another one is, and one of my favorites, is the role of a particular brain region. So not only can we look at the particular cells in a brain, we can look at particular regions in the brain. And one of them is the amygdala. So the amygdala is this brain region that is known not just for fear, but social emotional regulation. Thinking about the social valence of certain things, like whether or not you should be afraid of something or whether or not you are averse to something. As it turns out, in the autism brain, when you're young, you have too many of neurons in the amygdala. But as you get older, you have fewer numbers of neurons in the amygdala. And while scientists don't completely understand this process, they think that, as people age with autism, you have too many neurons in one area of the brain, and that controls certain types of behaviors. And then as you get older and you have fewer neurons in that area of the brain, that may regulate different behaviors. So one of the things that the Autism BrainNet does, and why I tell people to sign up for more information, is that the Autism BrainNet provides updates, scientific summaries in family-friendly ways on their website and through their newsletters that talk about what scientists know about autism and different types of genetic forms of autism, including Phelan-McDermid. And then also there's a lot of research on Do15Q to understand why people with autism are different. I think The other thing that happens, and Lilliam will tell you a little bit more, is that each donor family is carefully interviewed by our clinical staff so that we can get a sense of, okay, this person with autism had these particular features, which makes them completely different from somebody who has different features. And with the higher number of brain donations available, scientists can start doing some of these particular phenotype groups, like what do people with sensory issues, what do their brains look like? What about people with seizures, and how does that overlap with autism? What about individuals with intellectual disabilities, or those who are minimally or nonverbal? What do their brains look like? That research hasn't been done before, and now it's finally possible. But on the other hand, we completely recognize, and scientists completely know, that behind each one of these donations and these brains is really a tragedy, a tragedy that's happened in a family. That family has turned that tragedy into hope for help for other families. So there is a solemn respect for that as well. So we can learn more about the science, but we also realize that those donations come with a huge cost.
Yeah, I appreciate you pointing that out. And I do want to dig into some of the research and kind of go back and forth with some questions. But, given the sensitivity of this topic, in full transparency, the Phelan-McDermid syndrome community has experienced a lot of profound grief
Mhm.
lately. And, even our medical advisory committee has recently updated on our website that there is an increased risk for early mortality in Phelan-McDermid syndrome. And we're still trying to understand why. And, Dr. Alex Golvazon is really working towards this mortality review project. But I think this is a really important additional step or sort of complementary step within that research project of not just deep diving into understanding medical records and understanding these lived experiences, but then also potentially having a brain donation paired with it to even better understand kind of the nature of those losses.
Like, long-term goal would be to help in the cases where there's a donor or a brain donor involved, right? So that person has donated their next of kin's brain to the program. Ideally, with those, there would be able to be a better understanding about some of the proximal and then distal causes. So, what caused the death in the immediate sense? Like, people don't necessarily die of autism or Phelan-McDermid
Right.
syndrome. There's always something else, whether it's a drowning or a choking or, a seizure or something else. Better kind of understanding what's going on in that person's brain may help in the long term with preventative strategies to understand, on a brain level, what happened and what are the things that can be done to prevent those in the future. I mean, that's not something that can be done right now with the number of donations available, but that is something that's considered part of the longer term goal.
Right. That makes sense. And, I think to summarize some of the things you're talking about, that with the brain donations, there's a lot you can do. There's, more of the intracellular, the neuron based findings that some researchers are probably looking at, but then you also have region specific. And then you can have necessarily phenotypic specific research that can definitely apply to our families, especially those who have severe neuropsychiatric illness or catatonia or the epilepsy. On the other hand, then there can be also be Phelan-McDermid syndrome specific research that is also done. I know, as you mentioned, Duke 15 has had some success there, just in terms of being able to get enough donations to really make a meaningful impact report. But I do want to help families understand, let's say in the Duke 15 community, what is an appropriate sample number that impactful findings actually can come from.
No, it depends on the research question, unfortunately. So I wish I could give you an answer and say, okay, there are, you know, 20 Phelan-McDermid donations. Now all of a sudden we're going to have answers. Some questions you need, 50 to 100. Some
Mhm.
questions you may only need 5 to 10. So within Duke 15Q, I think there's been about 12 to 15, but they've mostly focused in on genetic findings and findings about what genes are activated and what genes are not activated. So, for example, with Phelan-McDermid, we would expect to see activity around the SHANK3 area, but also, maybe there are other genetic consequences that if there is haploinsufficiency in the SHANK3 region, what happens to other areas of that gene, or what also happens to other genes that work like SHANK3? Are they overcompensating? Are they upregulated? Are they downregulated? And those might be targets of interventions as well, is to think about, what other genes are affected. And that's been actually the strategy of Angelman syndrome, right? So they are using brain tissue findings and developing specific genetic therapies around what those findings have told scientists.
It's very difficult to have an exact number,
Right.
but we do try to maximize every gift, and so we do that with a lot of care.
One thing I want to add is that I think that people are under the assumption that, like, okay, one brain, one research project. In fact, the way that the study works is that the way the brain is prepared allows it to be maximized for use. So there have been brains in the collection that have been used for 50 different studies. So the ABN absolutely takes each donation incredibly seriously and treats it as a gift that they want to make sure is used and leads to as many discoveries as possible.
No, that's great, Alycia. I appreciate that. And it can be part of, 50 or even 100, types of different studies because of the way, the donation is prepared. When it comes to researchers, applying to request for tissue, there's a whole application process for that. They really need to meet certain criteria and really be aligned with the mission of Autism BrainNet. So again, there's a lot of care and thoughtfulness that goes behind this.
Right. It's not just any researcher just getting to have samples. There is a formal application process. So do you mind sharing just a little bit more about that so our families can understand that I'm not just signing up and getting something, there needs to be a legitimate research question, et cetera?
And so researchers from around the world who are eligible and approved, can request tissue and data from Autism BrainNet. And they do that through Safari Base. By the Science Foundation, it's like a clearinghouse to access, different samples and data, and Autism BrainNet is part of that. So, they have to have studies sort of already in place. They have to have the funding available for that. There is no cost to researchers when it comes to getting tissue and data from Autism BrainNet. So we do ask that as results are published and, that data gets sent back so that other people can access it, right? So we want to make sure that we build that database, of that information. If anybody has any questions, we do have information on our website for researchers. They can also send us an emails at requests@autismbrainet.org. And we support research worldwide. And we also have a scientific review committee that looks at the applications, usually on a quarterly basis. And that's how they determine whether, how to distribute that tissue.
I have been told that the process is more rigorous than applying for funding. The scientific review committee, as well as the program, is more careful about who they distribute tissue to than who they give money to, which I hope tells families that this is a serious project with serious people, and that these decisions get made with a lot of careful consideration and respect for what goes into a donation.
Yeah. And we also want the research community to be aware.
Right.
Right. I mean, ultimately, right, they're the ones who are going to be studying and analyzing the data and the samples. So, I mean, that's an important aspect that, we want families to know about the program. We also want researchers who could be eligible to work with the samples and the data to know about what's available to them.
Absolutely. I mean, I imagine in general, it's probably a little bit underutilized. As you were talking, Alycia, some both that forward and backward translation. So findings that have been found in some of our mouse models of Shank 3 can then be verified or confirmed in these brain models. But then also, I'm sure there's lots of findings that can be found in the brain tissue that then can be sort of verified on the mouse model, and then you bring some potential therapeutics forward. And so I think there's, as you're even talking, I'd be like, I want to talk to this researcher. Have they used it? I want to talk to this researcher. Have they used it? So I think that's important. So, Lilliam, can you walk us through the donation process for families?
Sure. So we know this is difficult considering brain donation may be difficult. The decision, for someone to donate is a very personal one. And obviously, as you know, this is a voluntary program, but we do encourage families who are interested in donation to learn about the process in advance, to discuss it with their loved ones, maybe the healthcare providers, just so that to ease, the burden of decision making during, at the time of donation. So we're very committed to making sure that the process is as simple as possible for every family and for our care partners. And as Alycia mentioned earlier, we have an amazing clinical team who, are there for families at the time of donation. They'll walk them through the donation process. They are available even after donation as well to answer any questions that they may have. But the first step is someone needs to call our toll-free number. We have a 24/7 toll-free helpline, and that number is 877-333-0999. And that's the number that either the family or whoever is going to make that phone call needs to use to let us know either when a death has occurred or a death is near. At the time of donation, we want that phone call to happen within 24 hours for immediate assistance. And during that time, then our clinical team will talk to the family, explain the process, and that includes also authorization for donation. Once the authorization for donation is received, then our clinical team, they take care of all the logistics, including, coordinating the brain recovery, as well as making sure that gets transported carefully to one of our biorepositories. And then last but not least, after donation takes place, our clinical team then will follow up with the donor family to learn more about their person or their loved one. And usually they schedule a time where that's convenient for the family, and that happens weeks and months after donation takes place. But this actually speaks to what Alycia was saying earlier about, do they have additional information like medical records or any type of evaluations that they can share that could be useful for research purposes? There's no cost to families when it comes to donation with Autism BrainNet. And also, pre-registration is also not required. So there's no need to sign up. We often use the term sign up, but we really just encourage families to sign up for more information. We have a quarterly newsletter that we send out with program updates and research updates. So that's really what they're signing up for. So really the most important point is to call that number to let us know, donation is imminent, so that, our clinical team can work with the family.
Mm-hmm. One of the things that I was thinking about that, since there is no pre-registration, obviously sort of this education just around Autism BrainNet, being familiar with the process in some of the newsletters that you're coming out. What do you suggest for families thinking about that actual phone call? Because I can't even imagine sort of in that worst moment of your life thinking, oh, I need to call Autism BrainNet.
That's a really good point. We do encourage families to make sure they talk to their loved ones. They can designate someone who can help them, at the time, to make that phone call for them. We've gotten calls from providers, care partners, so making sure that those around them know of their decision for donation. That's really important. Someone who's going to be able to support them when that time comes, to make sure that those wishes and that decision is carried out. So really, it's just important to do that. We do have some resources also on our website that families can access to help with that. We have an intent to donate form. It's a non-binding form that families can use. They can share that with other family members. They can put that in their pre-planning documents. We have donor cards as well. We have downloadable ones, and we can also send individual cards to families if that's, if they're interested in that. But, the most important thing is to really talk to others who are going to be able to support the family at the time of donation, to make that phone call or however it is that they're able to support them.
So ABN does try to take the onus off the next of kin. They obviously do need to sign some paperwork because this donation isn't taken lightly. We want to make sure that everybody's on board with it, but it doesn't have to be that parent or child or, the immediate next of kin that is, thinking about 100 different things at that moment.
One of the other things that I thought of while you were sharing is, it's called Autism BrainNet, but not all of our Phelan-McDermid syndrome individuals have a diagnosis of autism. So are they still allowed to give the gift of brain donation?
Yes, they are. Absolutely. Whether they have a diagnosis or not of autism, they're eligible to become donors with our program.
Wonderful. Any other frequently asked questions you get from families that I haven't hit upon?
So one of the things that we get a lot, and it's a reasonable question, is people are kind of afraid to sign up because they feel like that's some sort of legal obligation. And there's a misunderstanding about what happens when you sign up. When you sign up, you're signing up to get regular communications, including those scientific summaries and those updates on science that, or the scientific findings that I talked about earlier. It does not mean that you obligate yourself in any way. You're just, learning more. So I encourage people to sign up just to learn more about the science, and an area of science that they may not have already heard about.
Our donor criteria, that's actually a common question that we have. So for donors who have a diagnosis of autism or suspected diagnosis, there are no age exclusions when it comes to that. Same goes with those donors who have a rare genetic condition that has a high risk for autism, right? And those individuals may have a diagnosis or may not have a diagnosis of autism. But we also accept donors who don't have a diagnosis of autism and they don't have any other neurological or psychiatric conditions. And so for those donors, we do have a cutoff of 50 years. So they need to be 50 years or younger. Another question that we get is about funeral arrangements. So brain donation actually does not affect having any, funeral or your traditional funeral arrangements or other types of religious types of arrangements. So that's something that we always make sure families know. The time frame for donation, we want to make sure that we receive that phone call within 24 hours. So, and we want to have the donation at one of our biorepositories within 48. We want to make sure that the quality of that tissue is preserved.
And to clarify, Autism BrainNet is doing all of the logistical planning and everything that sort of once the phone call gets in place, then your team will handle that.
That is correct. Once we have consent or the authorization from the family, our team will take care of all of the logistics.
This clinical team has been working at Autism BrainNet for one of them decades. They understand that this is probably one of the worst times in someone's life, right? When they're having to make this decision. And they kind of come in, honor the family's wishes, and then just get everything done behind the scenes.
Mm-hmm.
I really appreciate you, Lilliam and Alycia, for being here today and for doing all the work you are doing at Autism BrainNet. And thank you for educating our families. I do want to mention that Alycia will be at the 2026 Family Conference out in Aurora, Colorado. So if you do have questions, if you've listened to this before the conference, please stop by her table. She'll be able to answer any questions. And of course, more information about Autism BrainNet, getting on their newsletter, any of those additional questions we will feature in our show notes. Anything else you want to mention about where families can find out more information that we will also include in our show notes?
Oh, absolutely. They can visit our website at autismbrainnet.org. That's also, they'll be able to sign up for the newsletter there on the website. And our phone number is also listed there for additional information. But there's information about the program. There's information about, resources for planning for donation, and also some information for researchers.
Thank you again. This is, again, a great resource, and appreciate your ladies' time today to educate our families. And I imagine we will hopefully have you back at another point.
Thank you
I
so
hope
much.
so. See you soon.
Of course, yes. Thank you
Bye.
all for listening.